"She's not your child," my husband said quietly, eyes lowered, voice like rain. "I took her from someone who didn't deserve her," he added. The storm clawed the roof while the kettle shrieked and then died. I stared at Evan, counting the freckles I used to kiss nightly. His hands shook, smelling like motor oil and cold river water. Our rented clapboard house felt crooked, like a boat unmoored. I thought of Maisie sleeping, one room away, soft and warm. The baby bracelet on her wrist flashed when streetlights blinked. I remembered the cedar box he keeps behind the linens. A metal clink answered my thought, like guilt waking suddenly. "What are you saying exactly?" I asked, breath thin as fishing line. He didn't meet my eyes. His jaw worked like a stalled engine. Rain hissed across the marsh, and the pipes rattled inside walls. "I kept her safe," he whispered, voice too even for truth. "From who?" I asked, because names make shadows stand still. The kettle clicked again, cooling against the dark stove. He took off his windbreaker and draped it over a chair. Black river silt dusted the hem like bruised confetti. His wedding ring flashed once, then hid beneath his trembling knuckle. I walked to the hallway and opened the linen drawer slowly. The cedar box waited beneath towels, smelling like orange and old smoke. My fingers found the key taped under the drawer's rail. He didn't move. He just watched, shoulders heavy, eyes fixed on me. The lid groaned, and light caught a scorched hospital intake band. Only half a surname remained, letters eaten by heat and time. I lifted a folded photograph, corners soft from being handled. Evan and some church steps, him younger, smiling without his eyes. The baby bracelet's twin rattled against the box, small as a secret. "Where did you get this band?" I asked, holding it carefully, avoiding tears. He rubbed his forehead and studied a stain on the floorboard. "It proves nothing," he said, and the words hurt worse than knives. "It proves there was a hospital, and someone missing their baby." Wind slammed the porch door, then the latch caught with a stubborn click. Maisie turned in her crib, a soft thump through the thin wall. I remembered the night he brought her, swaddled in a faded blanket. He had said a neighbor left her, desperate, pleading for help. That story now felt cheap, like an alibi bought with coins. I set the band beside the photograph and closed the cedar lid. The house smelled like damp wool, brine, and fear baked into paint. Evan sank into a chair, shoulders folding like paper in rain. "I didn't steal a child," he said, voice dropping, eyes finally rising. "I rescued her from a place where love is used like currency." His words scraped my chest because hope still wanted to believe him, but the scorched band glowed like a coal that wouldn't die. I reached for my phone, then let it slide back into pocket. Lightning flashed and painted the room with hard winter blue edges. Somewhere inside me the floor tilted, and everything started slipping. The rain didn't stop through the night, and neither did my thoughts. Every sound felt like a warning, every creak another lie breathing between us. Evan tried to speak, but I couldn't bear his voice anymore. I walked into Maisie's room, her tiny chest rising and falling like a secret trying to stay alive. The glow from her nightlight made the bruises beneath my heart visible in color. I touched her blanket and wondered who else's fingers once did the same. Evan stood at the doorway, his shadow stretched long, his face unreadable. "You're scaring yourself," he murmured, like a man defending a dream. "You made me live one," I whispered, "and now I don't know who I am inside it." I carried Maisie back to my room, locking the door even though it felt ridiculous. Evan didn't protest. I heard him pacing the kitchen, each step carving distance between us. On the nightstand, the hospital band lay curled like a dying snake. I kept staring at the letters M-A-I and an edge of an R, maybe a C. It was enough to haunt me. My pulse chased itself as I replayed every story he ever told about her, how he found her near the docks, how no one came looking. I realized then that his calm had always been practiced, not peace but performance. When dawn crept through the blinds, the storm had passed, but silence stayed. Evan slept in his chair, mouth slightly open, exhaustion softening his face. He looked like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. I tiptoed past him to the sink, where mud clung to the drain. The smell of iron rose with it, sharp, metallic, real. I opened the trash can and found torn paper part of a church bulletin, words faint but visible, Family Restoration Fund, Mount Abel Baptist. The date was 2 weeks before Maisie came. I folded it carefully, tucking it into my pocket like stolen proof. When Evan woke, he didn't ask where I'd been looking. His silence told me he already knew. "If I tell you everything," he said finally, "you'll never see me the same." I met his eyes, and the part of me that once adored him didn't even flinch. "Then I guess I'll be seeing you clearly for the first time." He looked away, jaw twitching, throat moving like he'd swallowed stones. I waited, hoping he'd speak, hoping I could still love the man I'd married. But he just whispered, "Some truths don't want to be known." The kettle screamed again, as if mocking his calm. I poured water just to have something to do with my hands. Steam blurred the window, the world outside fogged and uncertain. My reflection looked older, harder, but not broken yet. I turned off the burner and took a single breath that burned like confession. "I have to know the truth," I said to the empty room, and for the first time, my voice didn't tremble. Morning bled into noon while the house held its breath. Around us, I moved quietly, not from fear, but to keep thoughts from scattering. The hospital band sat on the nightstand, a moon of scorched plastic. I photographed it twice, then hid it inside my boot heel. I checked the trash again, hands steady, breath counting steps like a metronome. The church bulletin's corner matched a second torn piece in recycling. Together they named Mount Abel Baptist, Homecoming Sunday, and a donation link. Lower down, a name appeared faintly, written in pencil, Pastor Boyd Larkin. I didn't know him, but the town whispered about men like him, the kind who pray publicly and bargain privately when doors close. I searched Evan's windbreaker pockets while he showered, water masking my movements. My fingers found an ATM receipt from Waycross, time-stamped 2 weeks before Maisie. The dollar amount was odd, a withdrawal enough to fill a discreet envelope. The receipt smelled like damp leather and river carrying its own confession. I folded it, touched its edge to my tongue, tasting metallic ink. It felt wrong to taste evidence, yet right to believe my senses. In the laundry room, his pants held silt and a fine black grit. Marsh sand is pale here. This was darker, like river bottom. Different places leave different dirt, and his told another road entirely. I lined the particles across paper, tiny landmarks pointing inland, away. In the fridge behind leftover gumbo, I found a paper packet. Inside lay a keycard for a budget motel off Highway 17. The handwriting on the envelope said, "For Sunday," shaky and underlined twice. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with gathering certainty. Sunday had become a drumbeat, steady, loud, impossible to ignore. I remembered the voicemail I half heard yesterday, a man asking gently, urgently, "Need your answer before Sunday," he'd said, like reminding a forgetful neighbor. I replayed it now on speaker, volume low, voice thin as thread. The man never used names, only the shape of a plan. My kitchen suddenly felt like a map with pins no one confessed placing. I stepped into Maisie's room and the world softened at once. Her hands floated in sleep, fingers curling like seagrass underwater. The nightlight painted gold across her cheeks and little rosebud mouth. I reached for her hand, and memory opened like a window. The first night Evan brought her, she wouldn't settle or take milk. I laid my finger in her tiny palm. She seized it fiercely. The grip surprised me, a strength louder than any cry. Evan had watched, eyes bright, saying, "See, she knows who loves her." I kissed her forehead and believed him fully in that tender moment. The memory's warmth met today's cold, and both refused to move. Outside, the marsh buzzed with insects rebuilding after the storm's hard hand. I stood on the porch, phone in pocket, watching egrets stitch the air. Paranoia tasted like copper, but clarity stood just beyond swallowing pride. I pictured Waycross streets, cheap motel carpet, and a church's smiling foyer. I imagined a back door marked "Staff," where money learned new names. I thought of how Evan fixes boat engines, solving problems with torque. Maybe he thought a child was another problem requiring force and finesse. Love twisted like a wrench can still break everything it touches. I pressed my palm to the railing and promised a promise inside. I would follow the dirt, the paper, the voices, and the money. Back inside, Evan dried his hair, eyes avoiding me like I was sun. "You're hunting ghosts," he said, wrapping a towel around resigned shoulders. "Ghosts don't leave receipts," I answered, sliding the paper into my pocket. His jaw ticked once, a metronome no longer guiding any melody. "You don't know what men like Larkin do to desperate families." I held my breath, because his words slipped and revealed a door. "So you do know him," I said, and the air stiffened. He tightened, then shrugged, then let silence seat itself between our chairs. "We go to church sometimes," he offered, like that explained motels and Waycross. I watched him carefully, learning the grammar of the lies between words. When he left for the marina, the house exhaled and told me everything. The cedar box, the receipts, the bulletin, the motel envelope, the voicemail. Each piece formed a low, private constellation pointing me inland and upward. I spread them across the table, then photographed every arrangement twice. I wrote Sunday on a sticky note and circled it 3 times. Paranoia turned useful. Fear wore work gloves and started moving furniture. I packed a small bag with diapers, wipes, and the pediatric ID card. I slipped the hospital band into my boot, close as a heartbeat. The mirror showed a woman I almost recognized, but tougher by degrees. I whispered to her quietly, "Hold steady, and don't blink now." The next morning the sun rose sharp and cold, light like a blade through the blinds. I brewed coffee just to hold something warm, my hands too restless to stay empty. Evan had already left for work, leaving only the scent of diesel and soap. The kitchen looked innocent again, but truth hides best in ordinary light. I spread the papers on the table, the bulletin, the receipt, the keycard envelope, and stared until they seemed to hum. The hum grew into direction. I had to move, quietly, before Sunday came. The clock ticked, and Maisie's soft cries carried from her crib. I whispered to her, "Mama's going to find where you came from." I called in sick to the diner where I wait tables, my voice low and believable. The moment I hung up, I searched Mount Abel Baptist and Waycross on my phone, the screen filled with smiling faces, sermons, charity drives. Pastor Boyd Larkin stood in most photos, broad-shouldered, fatherly, eyes bright with false calm. His voice in videos had that syrupy southern weight that made people obey without noticing. I watched one clip, twice, and in the second viewing, I saw Evan behind him, carrying donation boxes. It wasn't charity. It was concealment dressed as faith. I saved the video, heart pounding steady. Next, I found a social page for Mount Abel Family Restoration Fund. The tagline read, "Helping families heal through faith and placement." The comments below were locked, moderated, sanitized. A woman's post had slipped through briefly before being deleted, a plea for baby M.A., missing since the hospital fire last year. My throat dried instantly. The hospital band fragment had those same letters, M.A. My heart misfired, skipped, then steadied. I reread the post screenshot through tears I didn't remember shedding. The woman's name blurred on my screen, but the desperation rang clear. "Please, if anyone has seen her, I just want her safe." That afternoon, I loaded Maisie into her car seat and drove toward town. The road to the marina passed through miles of marsh, green and gold like a painting hiding rot beneath the brushstrokes. I watched shrimp boats drift in, white hulls streaked with age. Evan worked there somewhere among engines and men who didn't ask questions. I didn't stop. Instead, I turned left, heading inland toward Highway 17. The drive felt endless, the air thick with pine and memory. Each mile whispered the same thought: you might not like what you find, but silence had already stolen too much from me. Halfway to Waycross, I pulled into a gas station and checked my reflection. I looked ordinary: ponytail, faded hoodie, tired eyes, but something fierce had replaced the fear inside. I asked the clerk if he'd heard of Mount Abel Baptist. He nodded without interest, said they ran those recovery drives near the old sugar mill road. "Lots of folks go there when they're down bad," he added, counting bills. I thanked him and left, heart both heavier and clearer. The world felt smaller now, all the lies linking into a single highway. When I returned home, the house greeted me with uneasy quiet. Evan's boots were gone, but his notebook lay open on the table. Inside, rough sketches, routes, costs, initials. One name repeated twice: Caleb. The letters scrawled harder each time, as if carved in regret. I didn't know a Caleb, but something about the way he pressed the pen down made my stomach twist. I took a photo of every page, then closed it softly. The baby monitor crackled faintly in the background, Maisie sighing in her sleep. The sound anchored me, kept me human amid unraveling threads. I turned off the lights, sat in darkness, and listened to the marsh breathing through the walls. Fear was still there, patient as tidewater, but it no longer ruled me. Instead, I felt purpose, sharp and steady. Tomorrow, I would reach out for help, someone beyond Evan, beyond the lies. I whispered again to the dark, to the child who wasn't mine but felt like she was. "I'm going to find the truth, baby," I said, "even if it burns everything." I drove to the bait shop at noon, heart steady like a drum. The sign creaked above the door, gulls wheeling against a pale sky. Upstairs, a narrow stairway led to an office with frosted glass. A woman opened it before I could knock, eyes sharp, posture calm. "You, Naomi," she asked, as if reading my bones directly. Rhea called her, I said, relief sliding through me like warm tea. She wore a denim jacket and a smile that didn't waste words. The room smelled like pencil shavings, salt, and brewed determination. A corkboard held maps, pins, and a faded badge behind plastic. She gestured to a chair and waited while I found my breath. I laid the receipts and bulletin on her desk carefully, palms finely still. She studied them in silence, tapping a capped pen against the paper. You brought seeds, she said. Now we grow a timeline. I told her about Evan's confession and the hospital band's scorched edge. I told her about Waycross, the motel card, and Mount Abel's page. Rhea listened without blinking, the way marsh herons watch shifting water. This isn't a neighbor's panic, she said, voice quiet, steady, sure. This smells like laundering custody through piety and fear. The words landed solidly, naming what I had sensed but dodged. I nodded once, because naming monsters shrinks their shadows meaningfully. Rhea opened a drawer and slid out a small spiral notebook. Rules, she said, because emotions lose cases faster than lies do. She taught me to timestamp every note with date, hour, and place. She showed me an app that encrypts audio with a simple swipe. You'll want truth unedited when your heart tries rewriting history, she warned. She placed a tiny lapel mic in my palm, light as a moth. Record yourself too, she added, what you saw, smelled, and felt. The instruction surprised me, then made perfect sense instantly to me. Memory becomes fog when grief and fear walk side by side. We built a map across butcher paper, taping it to her wall. Waycross ATM pin, motel off 17, Mount Abel's Sunday live stream. She drew arrows between them, then circled the word Sunday twice. He's delivering something or receiving something, she said, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Either way, we need to catch exchange, identity, and chain. I told her about the man's voicemail asking Evan for an answer. She asked me to play it. I did, watching her face carefully. When it ended, she said, that voice performs kindness like a trick. Then she wrote, Larkin? Beside voicemail and underlined it with care. I can watch from outside, Rhea offered, but you live inside his orbit. I understood immediately, even though fear pressed fingers against my throat. You need me to ask questions he thinks are ordinary, I said slowly. Exactly, she answered, and to not flinch when he tries comforting you. She coached me, through response lines, simple and open-ended, never accusatory. What time Sunday? I would ask, like asking about dinner plans. Do we need cash? I'd say, like wives say during errands. You'll mirror his words, then leave spaces he rushes to fill. Rhea smiled a little, proud and protective, like a mentor embracing courage. She printed copies of the bulletin screenshots and logged them with notes. We watched Mount Abel's last stream, pausing on frames showing side doors. That door, she pointed. Staff access, likely used for quiet arrivals. She traced routes on a county map with a blunt pencil. 2 cruisers sit here Sundays, but they wave at Larkin fondly. The pencil hung over a narrow alley beside the fellowship hall. This blind spot gives us audio, faces, and number plates, she said. She handed me a second phone, preloaded with the recording app. If he grabs your phone, the second keeps your truth breathing. Before I left, Rhea placed her card in my pocket carefully. I won't invoice, she said. I'm here for the child's safety entirely. I felt my eyes burn, but I refused to cry now. What if he tells me a story that sounds almost beautiful? I asked. Record it, she said, and remember beauty without consent is camouflage. The afternoon light turned gold against the frosted glass gently. Downstairs, bait buckets clinked, and a cash register sang briefly. I breathed salt air and tasted something like future strength inside. Sunday waited ahead, but now I had compass, map, and witness. The evening I returned home from Rhea's office, the house sat unnervingly still. The baby monitor glowed softly, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark hallway. Evan was in the living room, beer sweating in his hand, the television muted on a fishing channel. He looked up when I entered, eyes too calm, smile a shade too late. You went out, he said casually, but his tone carried a question folded in. Steal. Groceries, I lied, hanging my bag on the hook, forcing a yawn. He nodded, eyes sliding back to the screen, yet I could feel suspicion crawling in the silence. My pulse quickened, but Rhea's voice echoed in my head mirror. Don't challenge. I grabbed a soda and sat beside him, pretending normal felt possible. He talked about the marina, about a motor that refused to start. I listened carefully, letting him steer conversation toward Sunday. "We might have a church thing this weekend," he mentioned offhandedly. "Pastor Larkin wants to bless the families again." I leaned my cheek on my hand, acting half distracted. "Should I bring something?" I asked. "Like diapers for donation?" His smile flickered, then steadied. "Just show up," he said. "It's better if you're there." The way he said better chilled me. It sounded less like a hope, more like insurance. He finished his drink and stared at the dark window, his reflection split by raindrops. "You know, Naomi," he said quietly, "truth isn't always a gift." That night, I recorded my own voice on the burner phone Rhea gave me. "He mentioned Larkin. Sunday, blessing families," I whispered. He looked relieved when I agreed to go. I added the timestamp, the smell of beer, the flicker of fear. It felt strange, confiding not to a person, but to proof. I hid the phone inside a tissue box beneath Maisie's crib. Then I sat beside her and sang softly until she sighed, the tiny piece of sleep filling her lungs. The sound gave me courage. It reminded me who I was fighting for. By morning, Evan was already gone again. On the counter, he'd left a note. "Be ready by 9 a.m., Sunday. Dress nice." His handwriting leaned harder than usual, each letter pressing too deep. I folded it neatly, pocketed it, and called Rhea from the back porch. She answered on the first ring. "He confirmed Sunday," I said. "Good," she replied. "We'll be ghosts until we aren't." She explained her plan. She'd position near the church alley, Mike in her bag, eyes on the back door. I'd attend normally, smile, nod, record everything. "If something shifts," she said, "text me the word him. That's our trigger." I repeated it twice, memorizing the syllable like a prayer. The next 2 days moved like wet paint slow, smearing everything familiar. Evan acted sweeter than usual, bringing flowers, cooking dinner, calling me darlin' again. But every soft gesture felt choreographed, as if he practiced being good in a mirror. Friday night, he sat close and brushed my hair back. "You still trust me, right?" he asked. His eyes were gentle, his voice nearly breaking. I forced a small smile. "Of course," I said, and it sounded believable enough. He kissed my forehead and lingered there too long. "We'll be all right after Sunday," he promised. That sentence stayed lodged in my mind like a splinter. Saturday, I double-checked everything. Phone batteries, backup mic, and Maisie's overnight bag in case. I placed Rhea's card under the car seat, a quiet insurance policy. The mirror reflected someone both terrified and certain. I whispered to my reflection, "Don't wait for him to confess. Make him show you." Outside, thunder rolled distant over the marsh, promising a storm that hadn't yet arrived. I felt ready, not safe, but ready. When I finally lay down beside Maisie, the night pressed thick around us. I listened to her breathing, steady and perfect, and I thought of the woman who once heard the same sound first. Somewhere, she was still waiting. "Hold on," I whispered to her, though she couldn't hear. "I'm coming for both of us." Sunday dawned with a glare that felt judgmental, the marsh shining like glass. I dressed Maisie carefully, then handed her to the sitter Rhea trusted. The drive to Mount Abel carved through pines, resin scent thick and medicinal. Cars crowded the church lot, paintwork gleaming, families smoothing collars and hopes. I parked near the alley. Rhea had circled, air buzzing with hymns. The sanctuary's doors yawned wide, swallowing people who wanted absolution with coffee. I texted Rhea, "Here," then walked to the foyer and smiled politely. Ushers shook my hand, eyes skipping like stones over water's surface. The carpet smelled like lemon cleaner and fear hidden beneath good intentions. Somewhere behind walls, a back door opened and closed like a secret. I slipped into a pew and pretended prayer while my recorder listened. Larkin's portrait smiled from a bulletin cover, chin lifted like a promise. In person, he was taller, shoulders wide under a navy suit. His eyes scanned the crowd as if counting hearts and wallets simultaneously. "Family is God's currency," he boomed. Voice poured like warm molasses. Applause rose easy. People hungry to be told they were holy. I breathed through the sweetness and waited for the rot to show. My phone vibrated once Rhea's ping, short and sharp as a tap. I stood lightly and moved toward the side hallway, casual as thirst. The hymn swelled, "Blessed Assurance," and I mouthed along like a ghost. The staff corridor was cooler, the tiles squeaking under my cautious strides. A metal door labeled "Deliveries" propped open with a hymn book, edges frayed. Voices drifted from the fellowship kitchen, laughter coded in whispered urgency. I peered through a square of glass and saw Evan counting envelopes. Larkin stood beside him, hands clasped, rings glinting like small, obedient suns. "You kept her safe until the papers come through," Larkin murmured warmly. Evan nodded, throat tight, shoulders squared like a man bracing a storm. A shorter man hovered near the freezer, face turned, cap pulled low. Rhea slid into the hallway shadow, eyes meeting mine for a beat. I felt heat rise, then cool into something harder than fear. Larkin opened a cabinet and lifted a tin labeled "Restoration Cookies." Beneath it, a locked cash box clicked, then sighed as it opened. Stacks of bills stared up like quiet green confessions in daylight. "Donors prefer discretion," Larkin said, smiling at holy arithmetic and mercy. "Discretion is how sinners call theft a ministry," Rhea whispered beside me. I steadied my breath and held my phone nearer to the seam. Evan's voice broke low. "This ends today like we agreed, Pastor." Larkin's smile thinned, then reappeared, patient as a practiced mask. "Endings are stories we tell before counting what still needs saving." The shorter man shifted, revealing a tattooed wrist and a nervous swallow. A woman stepped in suddenly, hair damp, eyes rimmed with hope's exhaustion. She clutched a folder, knuckles white, voice trembling but clear and brave. "I'm here for my daughter," she said, and oxygen disappeared completely. My knees weakened, then locked, because her gaze was glassy, unblinking, determined. Larkin guided her to a chair like a host seating honored guests. "We'll review your readiness plan," he said, soothing like a soft sedative. He took the folder and flipped pages as if vetting salvation applications. "I signed everything months ago," she whispered. "You said Sunday would restore us." Evan flinched, guilt carving lightning across his face in one brutal stroke. The shorter man stared at the floor, as if reading spilled sins. Rhea's fingers brushed my sleeve, anchoring me to the moment's sharp edge. The woman's folder contained hospital discharge copies, names blacked out, dates legible. A fire report lay clipped beneath, scorched corner matching my hidden band. "I called every number and waited every Sunday," she continued softly. "You told me she was with a foster family until papers settled." Larkin nodded solemnly, as if grief were a season one can schedule. "Systems dragging their feet," he said. "We protect children while bureaucracy." Naps. Evan's jaw clenched, and sweat lit his hairline like thin rain. "Show her where her money went," he said, voice dry and deadly. The room quieted. Even the freezers seemed to stop humming mid-breath. The pastor's face didn't crack. It softened, gracious as practiced empathy. He slid the cash lid wider, then palmed an envelope toward a drawer. Rhea's phone captured every movement, lens small as a button, patience ruthless. "Our fund covers spiritual housing, counseling, and court filings," Larkin said. The woman's hands trembled, then steadied like a ship finding its keel. "I don't need your housing," she answered. "I need my baby returned." Evan swallowed, eyes flicking toward the delivery door like a trapped animal. "She's safe," he blurted, and the woman leaned forward, painfully hopeful. "Where?" she asked, and the word was both a plea and verdict. My mouth opened, but Rhea's caution held me silent, gathering the finale. Then a voice drifted from the sanctuary speaker, feedback warping into clarity. It was Larkin's voice from my lofted baby monitor test the night prior. His words braided perfectly with his current lies, a dissonance made visible. "Thank you for keeping her safe until the papers come through," it echoed. In the kitchen, Larkin's head jerked, eyes narrowing, smile finally cracking. The woman stood, pulse visible at her throat, courage beating loud. Evan looked at me through the glass, dread and relief combining dangerously. The shorter man backed toward the door, shoes whispering, certainty dissolving quickly. Revelation wasn't thunder. It was bright noonlight refusing to blink anymore. The betrayal wasn't partial. It was complete. A church built on theft. The sound of his name, Caleb, hung in the air like a curse I hadn't yet learned to pronounce. Evan's face had changed. I saw it when Larkin's voice on the loudspeaker cracked his mask open. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He looked relieved, almost dizzy with release. Rhea pushed open the kitchen door and stepped in, badge gleaming faintly beneath her jacket. "Nobody move," she said evenly, though her voice trembled with the weight of truth. The woman, the mother, turned toward me, her mouth parting when she saw Maisie's photograph flash briefly on my phone screen. Her knees buckled. I caught her before she fell. She smelled like lavender soap and hope resurrected through smoke. "You have her," she whispered. I couldn't lie. My tears answered before words could. Evan staggered back against the counter, palms spread as if holding up invisible walls. I did this for her, he rasped, eyes darting between me and the mother. For both of you. Larkin's charm evaporated. His tone hardened, that of a man used to authority being armor. You stole church property, he hissed at Evan. The phrase cut through the air, cold and absurd church property. The mother flinched like she'd been struck. She's my child? Not your donation drive? She said, fire shaking her small frame. Rhea moved closer, recording still running, voice firm. This conversation is being documented by the state. The room's oxygen thinned. Evan looked around, realizing every lie he'd built was suddenly crumbling in high definition. Caleb's coming, Evan muttered. He'll make this worse. Larkin tried to lunge for the drawer. Maybe for his phone, maybe for the cash. Rhea's hand snapped up like lightning. Don't. He froze, jaw clenching as sirens began their distant wail, growing nearer. The kitchen turned bright and frantic, each second stretching. The woman clutched the folder, her thumb tracing the singed hospital logo like prayer. You set the fire, didn't you? She asked Larkin, voice low, shaking but sure. You burned the records to erase her name. His silence was answer enough. Evan dropped to his knees, breath tearing out of him. I was there, he confessed. I thought, God forgive me, I thought it would scare him. Not, his voice broke, not burn the whole wing. The sirens grew louder, blue lights flickering against the frosted windows. Larkin lifted his chin, still trying to salvage the sermon inside him. Every good deed costs a little sin, he said, almost softly. Rhea stepped forward, handcuffs ready, badge flashing in the flicker of police lights. And every sin eventually calls its witnesses, she replied. Officers poured in, taking Larkin first, then the man by the freezer. Evan didn't resist. He just turned toward me, face pale, eyes wide open. Naomi, he said quietly, you'll hate me less if you know why. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Hate wasn't what lived inside me anymore. It was something quieter, sharper, a grief shaped like clarity. The mother stood trembling, folder clutched to her chest. She looked at me with a sorrow so deep it almost felt familiar. I prayed someone was holding her, she said. I never thought it would be you. I nodded, unable to speak, the edges of reality blurring as my body caught up to the moment. Rhea guided us outside while officers read rites in the background. The sanctuary's hymn still played faintly through the walls, an echo of people still singing, unaware their pastor was in cuffs. The air outside was damp, smelling of salt, paper, and redemption. The mother turned toward me, tears cutting through her dusty cheeks. Is she safe? She asked. I nodded once, voice steady. She's waiting for you. As they led Evan away, his gaze caught mine one last time. I never meant to hurt you, he said. His voice was small, almost childlike now. I wanted to believe him, but belief had lost its shine. I watched him vanish into the cruiser's blue pulse, knowing the truth no longer needed him to speak. My world had collapsed, but somewhere, a stolen child was about to go home. The courthouse steps glistened. After the rain, marble shining like bones under light. 2 days had passed since the church fell silent, and Street Bridget hummed with gossip. The news said local pastor charged with trafficking, but the town whispered, Naomi Blanchard brought him down. None of it felt like victory. It felt like standing inside a house with the roof gone open, exposed, unsure if I'd done enough. Rhea met me by the courthouse door, hair pulled back, clipboard tucked beneath her arm. You okay? She asked. I nodded, though I hadn't slept. Maisie? I asked. Safe, she said. They're arranging a temporary guardianship until the courts finalize the reunification. Relief hurt more than fear. It demanded breathing again. I exhaled slowly, letting the ache settle into purpose. That night, I sat alone in our kitchen, the cedar box open before me. It no longer felt cursed, just empty a container that had done its damage. I placed inside it a new item, Rhea's badge card with the case number and a slip of paper reading, Hold Steady. I closed the lid gently, like closing a chapter that still hummed beneath the wood. My anger didn't roar anymore. It whispered, sharp and precise. Rage is heavy, but strategy is light enough to carry. I opened my laptop and searched every Mount Abel donor name Rhea had mentioned. Many were local officials, others from out of state. A few businesses laundering donations through shell groups. If I wanted to dismantle the rest, I'd need more than evidence. I'd need spectacle. The plan came slowly, forming like tide pools, quiet at first, then brimming with life. Mount Abel's Homecoming Sunday broadcast had been the first domino. I would use their own showmanship against them again, but this time not with rage, with symmetry. Ria warned me. Let the justice system breathe, but systems forget children faster than headlines fade. They need to see the rest of it, I told her. The ledgers, the cover letters, the money trails. I'll do it quietly. They'll convict themselves. She stared at me, long and unreadable, then nodded once. If you're steady, I'll help you steer. The next morning, I visited Maisie's temporary foster home, a yellow cottage on the marsh edge, the air sweet with salt and lemon balm. The woman who kept her was kind, her voice calm, her hands steady. Maisie reached for me instantly, small fingers curling into my shirt. "Mama," she murmured, though she barely knew words yet. My chest cracked open, but I kept my tears behind my smile. "Soon, sweetheart," I whispered. "Soon you'll be where you belong." I kissed her forehead and smelled lavender and safety, everything the world had tried to take. The woman touched my shoulder gently. "She knows you," she said, eyes warm. "That kind of bond doesn't vanish." I drove home with the window cracked, the sound of cicadas building like applause for survival. At home, I made tea, set up Ria's encrypted files, and began cross-referencing donation dates with withdrawals. Patterns appeared like constellations. Waycross every third Sunday, motel check-ins before each deposit, Larkin's sermon topics matching transaction notes. Each connection made my pulse slower, not faster. Control had replaced chaos. I wrote everything down in neat, looping handwriting, each line a thread pulling toward one inevitable knot. For the first time in weeks, I slept without nightmares, dreaming only of ocean waves erasing footprints one by one. When dawn came, I woke calm, movements measured. I went to the marina and stood where Evan used to work. The boats rocked gently, ropes creaking in rhythm with tide and wind. I closed my eyes and forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because carrying hate would sink me too. Forgiveness wasn't release, it was armor. I dropped a small stone into the water and watched it vanish, leaving only ripples spreading outward. "You'll never use love as excuse again," I whispered to the current. Behind me, gulls screamed, wild and unbothered. That afternoon I called Ria. "I want the choir mom who handles live streams," I said. "Her name's Dana. She helped me record the sermon." Ria hesitated, then said, "She'll talk to you if she feels safe." Dana met me that evening at the bait shop, her apron still powdered with flour. She handed me a flash drive and said, "This has everything from the last 6 months." He thought deleting files meant deleting sin. Her eyes brimmed, voice trembling. I just couldn't listen anymore. I thanked her quietly. "You did the right thing," I said, "and I'll make sure it means something." I slid the drive into my pocket like a match ready for its strike. That night, I stood on the porch, tea cooling in my hands. The marsh glowed under a shy moon, whispering forgiveness to those who listened. I breathed deep and felt my plans sharpen. Justice wasn't noise. It was timing. I would wait until the next broadcast, the community healing vigil already promoted on posters around town. That night would be their reckoning, not through fire, but through exposure. And I would be calm when it happened, steady as tide, merciless as truth. I sketched the plan in the dim kitchen light, slow and exact. Each line on paper became an edge I could sharpen against them. I would not shout. Instead, I would arrange for silence to speak. First, Dana's flash drive would seed doubt into the church livestream feed. Then an anonymous ledger dump would reach local reporters before morning prayer. Ria would file emergency guardianship papers timed to the public exposure. I plotted donation names against dates, matching deposits to sermon topics. The key was rhythm reveal. Wait, reveal again. Until mercy exhausted itself. No dramatic arrest on stage. Instead, a slow unspooling that left no applause. This revenge would be surgical, public, and blessed by legal restraint. I called Dana back and explained how subtlety would wound more deeply. She breathed out relief, agreeing to insert timestamps into the live stream. Her hands shook only once when she handed me the rewritten metadata. "People trust what moves in familiar frames," she said, quiet and steady. I taught her to splice confession audio between hymns like a seam. The goal was to let donors hear their own names linked to crime. If a pastor preached restoration while camera-captured receipts told otherwise, shame followed. Shame would prompt withdrawals, calls, and at least one confrontation on Sunday. We would not invent shame, we would only translate it into proof. That translation would make forgiveness harder and accountability inevitable. Rhea organized a legal backstop while I arranged the optics carefully. She prepared petitions, filed names, and set a temporary guardianship motion. Her words were spare but precise, legal language cold as evidence. Timing and procedure, she reminded me. Keep this from becoming chaos. We would lock Maisie's care into law the moment the first file dropped. If someone tried to snatch her, the court order would stand between hands. Planning meant preventing more theft under the guise of saving. We wanted law to move before anger could claim a vigil. Justice served measured, not theatrical, protects children beyond our outrage. I learned to trust the slow machinery of rightful procedures. I crafted a narrative to hand reporters in person and electronically. It named Larkin, outlined transactions, and showed the burned hospital band evidence. I wrote in plain sentences, without flourish, letting facts make themselves audible. A local journalist agreed to run a piece early if the dump landed first. Rhea gave him encrypted files, and Dana scheduled the live stream alteration. Everything needed sequencing: leak, live stream queue, legal filing, press, release. Order ensured that the community watched the truth arrive like precise weather. No one could then claim the revelations were rumor or partisan attack. They would appear as a map someone could trace dot by dot. Maps are persuasive because they make wandering feel like deliberate direction. I rehearsed my face for the vigil, practicing calm in front of glass. Appear calm, speak soft, and let other voices carry the heat. I would sit among parishioners and listen while the machine of truth turned. When donors paused giving, their hesitation would become public evidence of complicity. When husbands and wives exchanged worried looks, stories would spread without accusation. Reveals, framed as charity audits, are harder to dismiss than angry indictments. My revenge would be built on exposure, procedure, and the town's conscience. I wanted no blood, only the slow erosion of protective facades. By nightfall, I hoped the church's ledgers would be empty and echoing. By morning, I hoped the woman would know she had her child back. That last thought steadied my hands when doubt crept in like fog. I imagined Maisie waking to a morning where truth was ordinary light. I pictured the woman reclaiming her child with paperwork and public apology. I pictured Evan, not sentenced by me, but judged by his own ledger's weight. Vengeance tasted like careful planning, not violence, a surgeon's relentless accuracy. I folded the papers, slid the flash drive into a hidden pocket. Outside, the marsh sighed the way tides do before a change. I breathed with it and let the plan settle like tide into sand. If this worked, truth would travel through town and not return broken. I slept briefly that night, safe in the knowledge plans had teeth. I moved through the house like someone arranging a delicate lie. Every action measured, I placed cameras where light would soften faces. Dana handed me a tiny USB with months of sermon metadata. Rhea taped laminated. Court papers inside a paperback hymnal for proof. I practiced sitting still, rehearsing expressions that would betray nothing. Maisie's photo stayed in my pocket, pulse calm against my ribs. We mapped the church's blind spots with sticky notes and patience. The marina men learned to look away when I glanced toward docks. I told myself this was not revenge, it was repair and record. Outside, the marsh breathed tide and kept my promises like witnesses, each device hid in plain sight disguised as hymnals or juice boxes. Dana showed me how to splice audio so truth could slip through hymns. She joked once, voice trembling, that the choir sounded angelic on camera. Rhea coordinated legal timing, penciling court arrival times onto her palm. We rehearsed small talk lines that felt like walking thin ice. I practiced asking casual questions that hid directed entrapment within them. My stomach tightened each time Evan's name entered my private scripts. They believed him. That faith sharpened my plan's necessary edges. I chose clothing to blend into pews and still catch attention. Rhea reminded me to breathe slowly, to anchor truth with presence. The night before, I placed a recorder inside a hymn book's hollowed spine. I labeled equipment with childish stickers so no one would suspect. Dana rewrote livestream captions to include donor names time-stamped with transactions. I copied ledgers onto encrypted drives, then burned duplicates onto DVDs. Evidence stacked in my hallway like quiet, accusing bricks of paper. Maisie's crib smelled of lavender and safety, making resolve gentler somehow. I tasted fear sometimes, metallic and sharp, then set it aside. Rhea sent a text with one word, him, and my phone sang readiness. She wrote instructions for extraction if things dissolved into violence. I folded those words into my scarf and wore them like armor. On Vigil Day, I woke before dawn to check batteries and cords. The house smelled of coffee. and a small, fierce determination. I dressed in neutral tones, hair smooth, makeup deliberately light. Maisie's sitter left a tiny note and a blank smile behind. I kissed Maisie's forehead and breathed promises into her sleeping ear. Rhea met me at the church's side gate with a thermos and steadiness. She checked my pockets like a parent. I checked hers like an ally. Dana slipped a thumb drive into my palm, eyes wet with old courage. The church bell sounded and people rose like tide in practiced motion. I walked down the aisle as if walking into solace, not trap. The cameras recorded hymns while Dana's metadata stitched names into captions. I felt the room's heat, breaths mingling like shared naive prayer. Pastor Larkin preached about restoration with a practiced softness in voice. My recorder waited, lips sealed, patient as a buried seed. Rhea signaled from the aisle, a slight nod, eyes bright with proof. I smiled and asked a neighbor about donation boxes, casual and soft. He answered with ease, cataloging dates and amounts like benign memory. Every ordinary answer fed the pattern we'd already traced in ink. When Larkin paused, the livestream caption scrolled donors' names alongside deposits. A woman to my right stiffened, her fingers pressed the collection plate. Whispers started like small waves and quickly became loud questions. The captions continued, pairing sermon phrases with ledger dates and figures. I felt eyes turn toward me, suspicion searching for a familiar face. Rhea texted him once. A choir chord covered the small commotion instantly. Then, Dana's splice played Larkin thanking an unnamed man for keeping her safe. Silence slammed into the sanctuary like a door left wide open. Faces drained color as captions revealed amounts matching donation nights shown. Someone whispered to their spouse, voice trembling with an accusing question. Larkin tried to smile and failed. His mouth betrayed practiced kindness. A man near the front stood abruptly, anger like thunder in motion. The man accused a donor directly, reading ledger entries on his phone. Confusion spread, then accusation sharpened into pointed, public, undeniable outrage. Donors checked phones, comparing timestamps to their own giving calendars. The woman who once prayed for her baby stood trembling, voice gaining ground. She read the burned hospital band's partial name and then her own aloud. Something shifted. People could no longer fold their hands and sermon their conscience. I watched Evan's face, each micro-expression mapping guilt into raw vulnerability. Instead of jubilation, there was a slow, awful recognition of participation. Rhea stood, voice steady as sealant, ready to deliver the legal strike. The sanctuary felt like a courtroom, people witnesses to their own undisclosed acts. The first note of the hymn barely began before chaos swallowed it whole. Larkin's microphone squealed with feedback, the echo bouncing off the stained glass. The captions on the live stream didn't stop. Instead, they bled truth across the screen. Donation $2,500 anonymous sponsor, J. Harlan, February 14. Transfer $3,200 Mount Able Relief Fund, marked M.A. each line unfurled like scripture rewritten in real time. Dana's voice cut through the hymn, soft and deliberate. This is the record of your giving. The congregation froze, confusion twisting into collective dread. I could see the older women clutching purses, lips moving without sound, prayers stuck midair. Rhea rose from the back pew, phone in hand, her calm sharper than any weapon. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone clipped, official. "This service is now evidence. Please, stay seated." The choir faltered, their robes rustling like frightened birds. Larkin turned toward the pulpit monitor, eyes wide, veins standing out at his temples. "Cut the feed!" he shouted, voice cracking. "Command too late." Dana had locked the pulpit, system remotely. I saw her lips move in a silent count, 3, 2, 1, and another clip rolled. It was Larkin again, voice smooth, captured from months earlier. "The mothers think they're surrendering for a few weeks. The paperwork never leaves this room." Gasps filled the sanctuary, but it wasn't outrage, it was the sound of innocence dying. I felt my throat tighten, every nerve burning like open wire. Rhea's badge flashed as she stepped forward. "This is Detective Calder, state investigator," she announced, reading rights as cameras rolled. "All members connected to Mount Abel's Family Restoration Fund are under audit." Larkin's expression fractured into disbelief, then fury. "You don't understand what good we've done," he barked, slamming his hand on the pulpit. "You think the state knows love better than the church?" His words broke under the weight of proof streaming beside his face. Every sentence he uttered became its own confession. I didn't move yet. I waited, letting the silence grow teeth. Then I stood, steady and unflinching. "You called love what you did to her," I said, my voice slicing clean. Heads turned toward me. Even the choir froze mid-step. "You burned her records. You hid her name. You sold mercy like a product." Larkin's jaw twitched, the mask fully gone now. "And you," he sneered, pointing at me, played the mother. He wanted to humiliate me into retreat. I stepped closer to the pulpit, the microphone picking up my every heartbeat. "I didn't play," I said. "I protected her until the truth could speak." Evan was in the aisle now, shoulders slumped, hands trembling. He didn't defend Larkin, didn't defend himself. He looked at me, eyes raw, voice barely above a whisper. I tried to fix what my brother broke. The congregation rippled, whispering the word brother like it carried weight. I saw Caleb then standing near the doorway, a shadow with Evan's jawline and a storm behind his eyes. His presence chilled the air instantly. He pushed through the crowd, yelling, "You ruined everything! You brought cops into this!" His fists clenched as he lunged for Evan. Rhea moved first, intercepting, but chaos already bloomed. The camera feed caught it, all the brothers clashing under the church cross, Larkin yelling half prayers, half threats, the choir screaming. I stepped back, clutching Maisie's photo, the edges cutting into my skin. Dana's voice trembled through the headset. "The feed's still live, Naomi. It's all there." The world outside the sanctuary was watching now. Phones buzzed in pockets. Reporters flooded the church's online comments, the story spreading faster than anyone could contain it. I met Rhea's gaze across the room and nodded. She raised her hand and gave the signal. Officers poured through the back, guns drawn but steady. Caleb shouted, tried to run, but was tackled near the altar. Evan didn't resist. He turned himself over quietly, his face wet, whispering, "I'm sorry." For the first time, his voice didn't sound rehearsed. Larkin screamed about divine trials and persecution, but no one listened anymore. The hymn track still played through the speakers, soft and eerie, a song meant for salvation now underscoring exposure. People began to cry, others simply sat still, watching the world they trusted crumble in daylight. When the officers led them away, I followed behind until the door frame, watching sunlight strike Larkin's cuffs. It glinted, beautiful and cold. Dana ended the stream, her trembling hands finding mine. "It's over," she said. I looked at the pulpit, the microphone still buzzing, the cross behind it cracked from age. "No," I whispered. "Now it begins." The sound of police radios faded as we stepped outside. Reporters swarmed instantly, but Rhea blocked them with calm efficiency. "Let her breathe," she said, shielding me from the flashes. The marsh wind carried the hymn's echo away, leaving only the gulls' cries. That night, I sat in my car facing the water. The drive from town was silent, except for Maisie's name repeating in my head. My phone lit up with news alerts, local church scandal exposed, mother found after year-long search. I scrolled once, then stopped, unable to read more. I closed my eyes and replayed the woman's face when she realized her daughter was alive, the way she touched my arm like I was the last bridge left standing. I whispered to the dark, "She's safe. That's what matters." Rhea called an hour later, voice soft. "They're filing everything tonight. You'll testify, but you did it, Naomi. It's done." I didn't answer at first. The tide was low, the air smelling of metal and forgiveness. "He'll go to prison?" I asked. "All of them," she said. "Even Caleb." I nodded slowly, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers ached. "Good," I said. "Then I can finally sleep." But when I leaned back, eyes closing, I didn't feel peace. I felt the empty kind of quiet that follows a storm, where everything's flattened but still breathing. The next morning I walked to the edge of the marsh, dawn painting everything silver. I dropped the recorder into the water and watched it sink slowly. It felt right. Some truths didn't need to be replayed, they had already done their work. I whispered to the wind, to the child sleeping miles away, "You're free now." Then I turned toward home, where the rebuilding waited. By Monday, Street Bridget gossiped loud enough to drown out the gulls entirely. The diner where I worked brimmed with whispers poured alongside coffee and eggs. Customers watched me like a weather map, trying to predict when I'd break. I moved through orders with steady hands, letting silence turn into discipline. Some women squeezed my wrist gently, saying, "You saved a child," trembling slightly. Others stared past me, loyal to Larkin's memory more than to facts. The marina men avoided my eyes, torn between fraternity and finally knowing. Evan's absence made every engine cough sound like a swallowed confession near me. When I stepped outside, reporters waited, their lenses hungry for a trembling hero. I gave them measured sentences and no tears, saving softness for the child. At noon, the deacons gathered on the church steps, ties tight like tourniquets. They argued about optics, about restoring trust, about interim leadership choices quickly. None of them said apology plainly, so the word haunted their pauses. Dana stood nearby, chin high, and handed petitions to anyone listening carefully. Rhea arrived with a folder and announced the audit's expansion without ceremony. Phones lit as donors withdrew pledges in real time, guilt auto-debiting faith. A woman shouted that we'd ruined their sanctuary with our godless exposure. Another woman answered, shaking, "Our sanctuary was ruined when babies were priced." The crowd split along invisible lines that had always lived here quietly. Nothing was broken that hadn't already been cracked beneath polished hymns long ago. That afternoon, I walked the marsh trail and found breath inside the wind. Children's laughter carried from the pier, bright against the town's frayed edges. I closed my eyes and saw the mother's face, that tidal relief. Rhea called to say the guardianship hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. "Be ready to testify," she said, voice steady, holding me to courage. I texted Dana a thank you, promising coffee after the world settled. She replied with a heart and a line, "Truth will keep singing." The message steadied me more than any headline's cold approval could. I practiced answers out loud, collecting sentences that wouldn't shatter under pressure. Every word became a plank in the small bridge I was building. Evening brought confrontation wrapped in quiet, smelling like diesel and regret. Thickly, Caleb's truck idled outside my house, music low, windows tinted darkly. Rhea's unmarked sedan slid in behind him, presence like a silent boundary. He stepped out slow, jaw set, eyes mean with borrowed courage. "You made us animals on camera," he said, voice shaking, failing bravado. I kept the porch light bright, and the screen door locked deliberately. "You did that," I answered. "We only stopped the echo from dying." He looked past me toward the nursery window, eyes narrowing with old entitlement. Rhea cleared her throat and recited the restraining order conditions precisely and calmly. Caleb spat sideways, then left, tires spitting gravel like cowardice losing its grip. Inside, I packed a small overnight bag even though plans were secure. Habit taught me that safety loves readiness more than prayerful wishing. I placed Maisie's photo atop clothes and the hospital band beneath them. The cedar box stayed shut, no longer a shrine to secrecy and pain. I considered calling Evan, then put my phone face down and silent. Forgiveness had already been granted, but access would not be offered lightly. Love without boundaries becomes history, repeating a familiar, dangerous rhythm endlessly. I made tea and watched steam curl like handwriting on glass panes. Outside, lightning stitched a thin seam along the horizon, promising weather. Inside, I stitched resolve into silence, practicing calm like a musician practices scales. The next morning, the diner filled with fishermen, teachers, and people avoiding mirrors. A teacher asked whether I feared standing up there, hand on Bible. "I fear silence more," I said, and plates clinked like quiet applause softly. A fisherman muttered that Evan always seemed soft-hearted but not steady. I felt the truth of that settle without malice, just clean reality. A deacon's wife left a tract with a handwritten apology inside it. "We didn't see," she wrote. "Please help us see better now." I slipped, putting it into my apron, grateful for repentance shaped like practical humility. Not everyone would change, but enough would to keep futures from burning. Hope doesn't roar, it keeps turning up for shifts and depositions every day. That afternoon, the mother arrived in town, escorted by child services carefully. We sat in a small room that smelled like paper and lemon polish. She held my hands as if checking they were real and warm. "I don't have words," she said, and tears found both of us. I told her Maisie still curls her fingers around mine like anchors. "She will know your heartbeat," I promised, a sound stronger than storms. We practiced saying her full name out loud, tasting rightful syllables together. When we hugged goodbye, relief felt like a shared roof after rain finally. Rhea watched quietly, recording only dates, times, and the absence of fear. The town buzzed outside, but our room held a steadier weather pattern. Evening news ran our faces beside the church's cracked cross and sirens. They called me brave, and then they called me reckless, depending on sponsors. I turned off the television and listened to crickets tuning the dark. Courage isn't a headline. It's the next breath chosen on purpose consistently. I wrote a note for court and placed it under my pillow. Tell the truth plainly, it read, and let their words convict them. Sleep came easier than before. Not deep, but without nightmares pressing. Tomorrow would bring questions, and I would bring answers measured, not sharp. The town would keep talking, but talking isn't destiny when papers hold. I kissed the photograph and turned off the lamp, ready for morning. The courthouse was colder than I expected, the air humming with fluorescent judgment. Reporters filled the hallway like crows, waiting for a signal to scatter. I held my coat tight around me, the paper of my testimony creasing softly. Rhea walked beside me, her steps sure, her calm a kind of anchor. Remember, she whispered, you're not performing, you're verifying the truth you already lived. Inside the courtroom, sunlight fought through tall windows, landing across the judge's bench in stripes. The birth mother sat near the front, fingers laced, eyes trembling between hope and disbelief. When she looked back at me, I nodded once. That was all the courage either of us needed. Evan entered in cuffs, thinner, older, his beard uneven from jail lighting. Our eyes met just long enough for recognition, not forgiveness. He mouthed, "I'm sorry," but the words had lost weight long before today. Larkin sat farther down the row, his expression defiant, jaw clenched in exhausted arrogance. The prosecutor read charges: fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy, obstruction, each syllable striking like hammer against glass. Every time the word child was spoken, the room inhaled sharply, then stilled. I folded my hands on my lap and stared at the seal on the wall. It wasn't justice yet, but it was motion. And motion, I'd learned, is what saves you from drowning. When they called my name, I stood, legs steady though my heart drummed unevenly. The oath felt heavier than the Bible itself. Truth no longer optional, but sacred. The prosecutor's questions began simple: dates, names, events, and then deepened. I described the storm, the confession, the box, the band, the lies. I said hospital fire and watched a ripple move through the audience. I told them how the town prayed while crimes wore choir robes. My voice didn't shake. I owed that steadiness to every silence I'd once obeyed. Larkin's lawyer objected twice, claiming my testimony emotional, but the judge overruled without looking up. When it ended, I sat back down, pulse loud but clean. The mother took the stand next, her voice trembling but unbroken. She read from her old notes, records of phone calls unanswered, petitions ignored. They told me, she said, that faith needed patience, that God was still working. Her tears glistened, but her tone sharpened with every word. God wasn't hiding my daughter. Men were. The room fell silent, even the judge leaning forward slightly. When she stepped down, she looked lighter, as if pain had finally been translated into something useful. Outside, through the high windows, I could hear seagulls circling, calling to one another like witnesses carried on air. By afternoon, verdicts landed like slow thunder. Larkin guilty on all counts. Caleb guilty. Evan guilty, though with mitigating circumstances. The judge's gavel struck 3 times, each one smaller than the last, like echoes losing conviction. People began crying softly, the mother among them, her face wet with relief. I wanted to reach for her, but I stayed seated, grounded by restraint. This was her victory too, maybe even more than mine. The judge granted temporary guardianship to her immediately, pending full reunification next month. She wept openly, whispering, "Thank you," to no one in particular, perhaps to the air itself. I finally let tears come, not for loss, but for proof. Outside, the courthouse steps were a blur of microphones and light. Rhea shielded me again, repeating, "No comments," until reporters gave up. Dana waited by the car, holding a folder, the case officially closed. She smiled weakly, handing me a small envelope. Inside was a photo from the live stream. Frozen at the moment, truth appeared on screen. "For when people forget what courage looks like," she said softly. I laughed once, quietly, because courage never looked glamorous. It looked tired and necessary. I hugged her tightly, thanking her for standing in the cracks when others looked away. The flashbulbs kept bursting behind us, but they no longer mattered. That evening, I walked the pier where this all began, the sunset bleeding red into gold. The marsh hummed with summer insects, indifferent to human reckonings. I leaned against the railing and watched the tide carry a leaf out to sea. My phone buzzed with messages, praise, curiosity, invitations to speak. I ignored them all. I'd spoken enough. My words had already built bridges and broken walls. Somewhere inland, Maisie slept in her mother's arms, dreamless for once. That image was the only epilogue I needed. Rhea joined me a few minutes later, 2 coffees in hand. her expression soft. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "We did it," she smiled, setting the coffee down beside me. "So what now?" she asked. I watched the last sliver of sun vanish beyond the marsh line. "Now," I said quietly, "I learn how to live without secrets." The wind shifted, gentle, smelling of salt and rain. It felt like forgiveness carried on the breeze, lighter than guilt but just as real. Weeks passed, and the marsh remembered everything before the world did. The gossip thinned, the reporters left, and Street Bridget learned silence again. I moved into a small house by the inlet, a place with peeling paint and honest air. The mornings smelled of coffee and salt, and the nights hummed with frogs and forgiveness. I painted Maisie's name on the porch rail, small and neat, a promise in white. Some evenings, her mother Clara would visit with the little girl bundled in a yellow coat. They'd sit on the swing while I made tea, our laughter blending easily with the wind. There was no awkwardness, no jealousy, just two women stitched together by survival. I told Clara once that she had her daughter's eyes. She smiled and said, "And you taught her what love sounds like." The town held a service months later, not for the church but for healing. It wasn't held inside Mount Abel. The building stood empty, vines curling through its cracked windows. Instead, we gathered at the pier, where salt water met old wood, where truth once echoed loud. Dana sang the hymn that had once exposed everything, her voice gentle, mending. Rhea spoke softly about systems and the courage of ordinary people. I didn't speak at all. I only stood beside Clara and held Maisie's hand. The tide reached for our shoes, greedy and kind, and the sky blushed pink with mercy. When the hymn ended, I whispered to Rhea, "It's strange how peace sounds quieter than pain." She smiled, saying, "That's because it doesn't need to prove itself." Afterward, life unfolded like a clean sheet hung to dry. I returned to the diner, pouring coffee for fishermen, teachers, and the newly curious. People still whispered, but now it was gratitude instead of fear. One morning, a deacon's wife left a small envelope with a donation for honest adoptions. The note read simply, "For every child still waiting to be found." I pinned it to the kitchen wall, not as victory, but as reminder. Dana's livestream company grew, this time used for transparency training instead of cover-ups. Rhea started her own investigative unit, hiring women who knew silence too well, and Clara began writing letters to other mothers, telling them what survival really looks like. We built small, deliberate futures, brick by brick, word by word. At night, I sometimes sat alone, watching the marsh fill and empty again. The water's rhythm felt like breath: inhale, exhale, forgive, repeat. I'd hold the old hospital band in my palm, its edges smooth from time. It no longer burned when I touched it. It only reminded me that love can begin in ruin. I prayed, not to erase the past, but to honor what it taught me, that truth, when spoken, becomes inheritance. I whispered into the dark, "She's yours now," but she was always meant to be. Somewhere inside, peace anchored quietly, unshowy but unshakable. And sometimes, when Maisie ran across the porch yelling, "Mama Naomi," I let her. The world had tried to twist our story into scandal, but we rewrote it as survival. She would grow up knowing two mothers, not divided by lies, but united by choice. The marsh kept our secrets once, now it kept our peace. When the wind rose, it sounded almost like a hymn, one that no one had to hide. Autumn crept in gently, gold spilling across the marsh like forgiveness learning to linger. The nights carried a chill, and the air smelled of wood smoke and renewal. I sat on the porch each evening, watching light fade behind the pines, Maisie asleep inside while crickets rehearsed their small, perfect music. Clara often called just before sunset, her voice soft, full of the steady joy that only healing grants. "She still reaches for you when she dreams," she said once, and I smiled into the phone, heart blooming with something between grief and grace. "That's all right," I told her. "She'll outgrow it when her world feels whole." But deep down, I knew some bonds never asked to fade. They simply learned gentler ways to stay. I found work with Rhea's new unit, helping trace missing children who'd fallen between systems and lies. My days filled with files, faces, names, proof that pain could still become purpose. We worked out of a small office above the bait shop again, the same one where hope first took shape. Some nights we stayed late, the sea air creeping through open windows while Rhea typed case reports, her pen tapping like a heartbeat. "You know," she said one evening, "revenge stories end, but responsibility doesn't." I nodded, understanding it completely. The work wasn't about rage anymore. It was about restoration, the slow rebuilding of what deceit once stole. And when I looked at the photos of the children we'd helped return home, I finally believed in goodness without needing it to sparkle. Dana visited sometimes, camera slung over her shoulder, documenting the quiet aftermath. She wanted to make a short film, not about scandal but about endurance. "People forget," she said, "that truth isn't loud, it's persistent." She caught me once in a still frame, eyes tired but alive, the marsh, behind me glimmering. "That's your peace," she said, smiling through the lens. I laughed softly. "No," I told her, "that's what peace looks like when it stops pretending to be perfect." She titled the film, "The Tide Doesn't Lie." When it premiered online, comments filled with stories from strangers finding their own courage. It wasn't fame, it was connection, the quiet kind that travels farther than noise ever can. One evening, as the sky bruised violet, I took the old cedar box to the edge of the dock. Inside were the last artifacts of that life, the hospital band, a court document, Evan's small apology written on prison paper. I whispered a thank you not for what happened, but for what it forced me to learn. Then I tipped the box into the water. It sank slowly, the ripples widening until they vanished, the surface calm once more. I stood there for a long while, letting the wind thread through my hair, carrying something lighter than memory. In that moment I understood the final truth. Some stories don't end with revenge, they end with release. When I went back inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and sea air. Maisie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something half-formed and sweet. I leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "You're free now, baby. We all are." I turned off the lamp, the marsh glowing under a slice of moon, and let quiet claim the rest of the night. If you've listened this far, remember sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting fire with fire, but choosing to rebuild after the ashes. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember that truth always finds its voice, no matter how long it's been silenced. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that turn secrets into light, one heartbeat at a time.